Yesterday we were learning the difference between Kli Rishon, Kli Sheni, Irui Kli Rishon. In other words, the pot that's directly on the fire is called a Kli Rishon. That could cook everything, an entire food, the whole food, as long as it's Yatza lettuce bay, as long as it's still hot, that it's 110 degrees, then it could cook anything, even if it's off the fire. The only thing a Kli Rishon cannot cook off the fire, even if it's hot, is raw meat, not chicken, raw meat and raw salt. But everything else, this first vessel, because it was on the fire, the walls of the utensil became very hot. Therefore, it has the ability to cook, even though it cools down a little bit, as long as it's over 110 degrees. Kli Sheni is doubtful in halacha what it could cook. There are many things maybe could cook in a second vessel. So Kli Sheni is when I pour it from the first vessel into a second vessel. So for instance, if you have a kettle or an urn, that's called on the fire, that's a Kli Rishon. If I take from a kettle and pour it into a cup, that cup is a Kli Sheni. Or if I take a cup underneath the urn and pour water into the cup, this cup is now what's called the second vessel. The only thing we know it doesn't cook is, according to the Alter Rebbe, all liquids or spices, with the exception of salt. Spices and all liquids cannot become cooked in a Kli Sheni. Okay? So, but we don't know, everything else maybe does cook. We don't know. So therefore you can't put anything that's raw into a Kli Sheni because it might cook it. Okay, that's what we learned yesterday. We also learned what? On Shabbat. Oh, by the way, this class is Hilchos Bishul on Shabbos, not Monday night. Also, we learned Iri Kli Rishon. That means if I have something in a bowl, okay, like a piece of raw chicken in the bowl, and I pour from a Kli Rishon on top of the chicken, so it cooks the outer layer of the chicken. It doesn't cook the whole chicken. If you put the chicken into the pot that's on the fire or off the fire, it cooks the whole chicken or anything else. If you pour from a Kli Rishon over something, it can cook what's called kadei klipa. The klipa means to peel the whole area. You would have to peel it to eat it. Okay, that's...
What about spices and water?
Pouring what?
You have a bowl, some cold water, with spices. You got to pour from the urn.
Directly over the spices? In the cold water? The spices are in the cold water?
Either way.
No, wait a minute.
Just water or just...
No. If you have spices in an empty cup, okay, you're not allowed to pour from a Kli Rishon over the spices because it's going to cook it, the peel of it, the shell of it, which in spices means the whole thing. Okay? You could put spices into a Kli Sheni. That means if I took from a pot of soup and poured it into a bowl, right, then I could put spices into that Kli Sheni. Okay? But other things, it says in halacha, if the Kli Sheni is hot, obviously, if it's cold down, the cold doesn't matter, you can't cook anything. But as long as it's possible to cook it, you shouldn't put things into a Kli Sheni. We also discussed yesterday, I'm reviewing this because we have to review all these, what?
There's a little bit cold water. Are you allowed to put hot water from a kettle?
We'll learn that then later. That's a din to talk over, we'll see. Let's go in a systematic way. We also discussed what din does the ladle have, okay? Now, you have a pot of soup. I took it off the fire, okay? But it's just still very hot. So Friday night you have chicken soup, right? And I take the ladle and I put it into the chicken soup, take out and pour it into a bowl. Now, what law does this ladle have? Does it have a din of a Kli Sheni, second vessel, and therefore the bowl would be a Kli Shlishi, a third vessel? Or do we say no, that because the ladle goes into the soup, maybe it gets the same status as the pot of soup itself does? Okay? So we discussed yesterday, there's a big argument in halacha about that. The consensus, generally speaking, amongst most poskim, can't say everybody, but most poskim hold, that if you leave the ladle in the pot, then it gets the status of the pot. Then the ladle becomes a kli rishon. Then the bowl of soup would only be a kli sheni, the second vessel. But if you take the ladle in and out, you pour out the bowl of soup and you don't put it back into the soup right away, so then the ladle would have a din of a kli sheni, okay, and then the bowl of soup would have a din of a kli shlishi. Now that is a very, very practical din, in practical halacha. Because we just learned that in a kli sheni, the second vessel, you can't put things into because they might cook. But if you have a kli shlishi, most people say kli shlishi doesn't cook anything. The third vessel is already too far out, so it doesn't cook anything. So there's a din like this. I'm starting with another din, and we're going to keep going over this stuff to get us straight. We learned that what happens if something was completely cooked already? Is it halachically possible to recook it? I'll give you a simple example. Somebody cooked noodles, lokshen, okay? They're cooked. So now you cook lokshen, noodles, and then you put it into the fridge, whatever, or you left it out. Now the question is, can I put the noodles back into the bowl of soup? So even though normally kli sheni could cook, like we said, but in this case, the noodles are already cooked. And there's no cooking after cooking by something which is dry. Something which is dry, there's no halachic re-cooking after cooking. So therefore, even though the noodles now are cold, okay, I'm allowed to put it into the bowl of soup that's a kli sheni. Why? Because it can't become, it's already cooked.
So why not a kli rishon?
What?
You could put it in a kli rishon.
Technically you could. It says in halacha it's better not to put anything back into a kli rishon just to...
Right, but it doesn't cook it.
Yeah, I understand. But halacha says it's better not to put anything into a kli rishon. What?
If you did put it in, you eat it?
Yeah, for sure. One minute, because it's cooked, it can't become recooked. One second.
It's off the fire.
Yeah, off the fire.
It's on fire.
I mean, technically, if it's on the fire, you can't cook it either. But you don't put anything into a kli rishon on the fire, and many poskim write as a chumrah, even off the fire, you don't put things into. But now, what happens if liquid was cooked? Liquid was cooked. So let's say you made a cup of tea, okay, or coffee. So liquid was cooked, right? Now the coffee cooled down. Can I reheat that coffee? So the din is as follows. It's an argument in halacha if there's bishul after bishul by what's called lach, something wet. But the halacha is, what Alter Rebbe holds, is that if it's still warm, you could recook it. It's not a problem. If it's cold, then you shouldn't recook it. Okay? So that's the din of bishul acha bishul. If it's something which was cooked, there's no cooking after cooking. But if it's by something dry, even if it's completely cold, it doesn't matter. If it's liquid and it cooled down, then there is cooking after cooking. What?
What about instant coffee and sugar? What do you do now?
Okay, well, we'll get there soon. One second. So now the question is like this. But this din of no cooking after cooking is cooking after cooking. Is there a din of cooking after baking? In other words, something that's baked, could it halachically become cooked again? Give you a simple example. I want to take crackers. Crackers are baked, okay? Can I put it into a hot bowl of soup? That's a kli sheni. If it's a kli sheni, the Alter Rebbe is very strict. He says it might even be biblically forbidden. It might even be iser chatos. So you're not allowed to take cookies, but crackers or challah or croutons that are either fried or baked, but it's definitely not cooked. In other words, there's no cooking after cooking, because you don't change the texture of it by recooking it. But if you have something that was baked and now you're going to cook it, so now you're changing the texture through heat. So therefore the din is, because baking does different than cooking does different than baking. 1 second. So therefore, if that would be the case, then you wouldn't be able to put croutons in a bowl of soup. That's a kli sheni. But if you count the ladle as a kli sheni, and therefore the bowl of soup is a kli shlishi, so then I would be allowed to put crackers or bread or croutons into the soup. So it matters. What din does the ladle have? If it has a din of a kli rishon, then the bowl of soup is only kli sheni. If it's a second vessel, I could put lakshin, noodles in, because noodles are cooked. There's no cooking after cooking. But if it would be, like bread or crackers or croutons or things like that, it would be an issue.